The morning of my brother's wedding, I stood in a hotel corridor with a flute of champagne in my hand that I had not touched, listening to him explain me to his groomsmen. Marcus's voice carried through the cracked door of the suite, with that easy confidence people have when they think the person they are talking about is nowhere nearby. He said, "I had always been like that." He said, "Serena never repays. Classic burden." He said he had invited me because our mother would have made it a whole thing otherwise. Derek, his best man, laughed. Another voice chimed in and said, "At least she cleans up." More laughter followed. I did not catch every word after that. But then, Marcus said something that landed with perfect clarity. He said I meant well. He said I just never figured out how money works. I stood there for exactly 4 more seconds. I counted them. Then I straightened the strap of my dusty rose dress, took one small sip of the champagne, and turned back toward the bridal suite where Priya was having her veil adjusted. I smiled at her reflection in the mirror. She smiled back, warm and unworried, with no idea what had just happened out in that corridor. As far as she knew, I was simply Marcus's quiet younger sister, the one who worked in finance stuff, the one who lived modestly in a downtown apartment and came to every family event on time without ever making a scene. Nobody in my family knew what I actually did. For 4 years I had preferred it that way. But standing in that hallway, hearing my brother reduce 8 years of my life and 4 years of his company's survival to the phrase classic burden, something shifted so quietly inside me that no one else could have seen it. I did not cry. I did not walk back and confront him. I did not give him the satisfaction of a dramatic reaction. I simply took out my phone, typed a message to my financial director, and left it unsent. I told myself I would decide later whether to press send. My name is Serena Okafor. I am 34 years old. I run a private equity fund in Chicago called Meridian Capital Group, and that fund currently manages just under $2.1 billion in assets across 17 portfolio companies. I did not inherit any of it. I did not marry into it. I built it between the ages of 26 and 34, mostly in silence, mostly alone. Mostly in the hours before dawn while the rest of the world was still asleep. Marcus is 38. He is handsome, charming, socially effortless in ways I have never been. Growing up in our parents' house in Atlanta, he was the one who filled every room before he even entered it. Birthday parties, school events, Sunday dinners, holidays, random weeknights when nothing special was happening at all. Marcus was always the gravitational center. I was the thing in orbit. That was the arrangement. And for most of my childhood, I accepted it the way children accept weather. It was simply the atmosphere I had been born into. Our father owned a mid-sized construction firm. Our mother taught elementary school. We were comfortable, but we were never wealthy. And when I was 12 and Marcus was 16, I noticed something that stayed with me far longer than anyone probably intended. Marcus could ask our father for money and receive it instantly, warmly, without paperwork, without questions, without the faintest suggestion that he needed to justify himself. When I asked for the same amount for my school investment club, after already reading 3 books on compound interest at 12 years old, my father laughed and told me to ask my mother. So I asked my mother. She gave me half the amount and told me not to tell Marcus. I turned that half into enough to pay for my own school supplies for the next 2 years. My father never knew. And really, that small detail matters more than it seems. Not because I am interested in collecting grievances. I am not. Truly, I am not. But because it explains something essential. I learned very early that if I wanted to build anything, I would have to build it quietly. I had no other option. In the geography of my family's attention, Marcus was the coastline. I was the interior. When I graduated from the University of Michigan with a degree in finance and a minor in computer science, Marcus threw a party for himself that same weekend. He had just been accepted into a local MBA program, and the family's collective excitement was so complete, so total, that my graduation dinner was rescheduled twice and eventually became a lunch at a chain restaurant where my father spent 40 minutes on his phone. My mother reached across the table, held my hand, and told me they were proud of me. I believe she meant it. I really do. But sometimes love is sincere and still not enough to change a pattern. At 23, I moved to Chicago with $14,000 in savings, one contact at a mid-tier investment firm, and absolutely no intention of ever asking my family for anything again. By 26, I was a senior analyst, By 28, I had left that firm and was managing a small private fund for 3 clients I had cultivated myself. By 30, Meridian Capital Group was registered, capitalized, and operating. By 32, we had closed our first institutional round. By 34, the fund held $2.1 billion in managed assets. I had a team of 11 people, a corner office overlooking Lake Michigan, and a personal net worth quiet enough to stay invisible and large enough to make my father's construction company look like a lemonade stand. My team knew who I was. My clients knew who I was. The financial press knew who I was. Meridian had been mentioned in the Wall Street Journal 3 times, and I had given exactly 1 interview to a trade publication read almost exclusively by institutional investors. I kept everything else intentionally restrained. No Instagram, no speaker circuit, no glossy profile. We had been approached twice for one of those public success stories people like to package and sell, and I declined both times. My family knew none of it, not because I was ashamed, not because I was trying to punish them, but because the one time I had tried to share a milestone, when I was 30, and called my mother to tell her I had officially registered my own firm. She had spent most of the conversation telling me that Marcus had just been promoted to vice president of sales at a tech startup, and wasn't that wonderful? I told her, yes, it was wonderful. I never called back to tell her more about the firm. That startup was called Nova Bridge Technologies. It built logistics software for mid-market supply chains. The product was genuinely useful, the engineering was competent, but the company was severely undercapitalized, and within a year of Marcus joining, it was about 18 months from collapse. Their Series B had failed. Their original lead investor had pulled out. Their chief executive officer, Raymond Cho, was quietly desperate. I learned all of this through my own deal flow. Nova Bridge crossed my desk as a distressed opportunity. I had my team run the numbers. The fundamentals were solid. The technology worked. The problem, but really this is what mattered, was structural. They needed patient capital. They needed someone who understood the space and would not panic at an 18-month horizon. I authorized the investment through a holding entity called Lakeview Horizon Partners, $78 million, deployed across 4 years in tranches. Raymond Cho never met me in person. All communication went through my director of private investments, Caroline Marsh, who represented Lakeview in every board communication. I knew Marcus worked there. That was not incidental. In fact, it was part of why I studied the company more closely. I wanted to understand his world. And maybe, if I am being fully honest, there was another reason too. I wanted to know that if his company ever collapsed, I would not be the reason it happened. So I said nothing. I did not tell Marcus. I did not tell my parents. I did not tell anyone in my family. For 4 years, I lived on one side of an invisible wall while my brother built his professional identity on the other, never realizing that I was helping hold up the structure beneath him. I watched Nova Bridge stabilize. I watched it grow. I watched Marcus talk about fundraising success on calls with our mother, as if it were the natural result of his own sales leadership. I listened at Christmas dinners while my father bragged about Marcus to relatives and family friends. I sat there with my glass of wine, quiet as ever, carrying the private knowledge that the company he was so proud of had survived in no small part because of money he believed had come from nowhere that had anything to do with me. Do not mistake that for nobility. I was not noble, I was strategic, controlled. And for a long time that felt sufficient. It worked, until the wedding. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Priya was radiant. Marcus cried at the altar, which surprised me. I had not seen him cry since childhood. For a brief moment, watching him, I felt something genuinely warm. He was still my brother. We had grown up in the same house. He had once taught me how to ride a bike. He had defended me, memorably, from a neighborhood boy who pulled my hair. The love had always been there somewhere underneath all of it. But love and clarity are not the same thing. And the truth is, I had spent too many years confusing one for the other. The reception took place in a ballroom in Atlanta, one of those venues that costs more than many people earn in a year. Marcus had told our mother it was entirely Priya's family's budget. Priya's family was generous, and that part was true. But I had seen the invoice in a forwarded email chain that included me. And I knew Marcus and Priya had placed $40,000 on a credit line he had told our parents was already paid off. I said nothing. It was not my business. Dinner was elegant. The speeches were polished. Derek, the best man, made the room laugh 4 times. Priya's maid of honor made half the tables cry. I had not been asked to speak, and that was fine. I had prepared nothing. I expected nothing. What I had not expected was the corridor, the cracked door, the bourbon soft confidence in Marcus's voice as he told a room full of men that I was the family burden who never understood money. I walked back inside after hearing it. I danced twice, once with my Aunt Gloria and once with a cousin I had not seen since 2019. I ate the salmon, which was excellent. I watched Marcus and Priya cut the cake and glow with that unmistakable happiness people have when they are standing at the beginning of a life they believe they understand. At 10:47 p.m., I picked up my phone. I opened the message I had drafted earlier that afternoon to Caroline. It said only this: initiate the withdrawal. I pressed send. Then I slipped my phone back into my clutch and walked across the room to congratulate the bride. What happened after that message cannot be understood without understanding Caroline Marsh, because truthfully, she was the reason any of it worked at all. Caroline had been with me since Meridian's 2nd year. She came out of forensic accounting, which meant 2 things were true about her in every situation. First, she was almost physically incapable of missing a detail. Second, she considered undocumented decisions a form of moral weakness. She had processed every disbursement to Nova Bridge, tracked every communication, logged every revision, and maintained a file she had titled, at her own insistence, Lakeview Complete History. Inside it were 4 years of wire confirmations, board communications, financial projections, legal correspondence, and the kind of meticulous records that make a story impossible to distort later. So, when I sent her those 3 words on a Saturday night, Caroline did not ask me if I was sure. She did not call for emotional clarification. She simply acted. Within 40 minutes, she had the withdrawal notice prepared. By midnight, it had been transmitted to Nova Bridge's board of directors. The language was precise, clinical, and devastating. Lakeview Horizon Partners, pursuant to Clause 14B of the investment agreement, was initiating full withdrawal of all remaining committed capital effective in 72 hours. The notice further stated that the fund's representative would be available Monday morning to discuss transition arrangements. Raymond Cho read that notice at 6:14 Sunday morning. I know the exact time because Caroline told me later that he called her cell phone at 6:15. I flew back to Chicago Sunday afternoon. That morning, before the flight, I had brunch with Nadia, my closest friend and the only person in my personal life who knew the full scale of what I had built. Nadia was a child psychologist in Lincoln Park, and she was one of those rare people whose steadiness makes everyone around them hear themselves more clearly. For 10 years, she had listened to my family stories without flinching, without dramatizing them, without ever pretending that a wound was the same thing as an identity. Over Eggs Benedict, I told her what I had done. She set down her fork and looked at me carefully. Not judgmentally, not approvingly, just carefully. "How do you feel?" she asked. I told her the truth. I said I did not know yet. She asked if I wanted Marcus to call me. I thought about it. Then I said something that even to me sounded unfinished. I said I wanted him to understand something. I said I did not know whether I wanted the call itself. Nadia nodded the way she always did when she heard the real sentence underneath the spoken one. "Those are different things," she said. I told her I knew. Then she picked her fork back up and said, "Let me know when you figure out which one you actually need." That was Sunday. By Sunday evening, Nova Bridge's chief financial officer, Patrick Huang, had called Marcus's personal cell 4 times. Marcus still had not connected the withdrawal to me. How could he? He did not know Lakeview existed in relation to him. He did not know I existed in that world. But by then, the math inside the company had already become undeniable. $78 million does not leave quietly. Not when a company is built around its presence. Not when the missing amount is woven into payroll assumptions, runway calculations, board expectations, and executive confidence. Monday came with the cold, indifferent efficiency that consequential days always seem to have. By 9 o'clock that morning, Patrick had convened an emergency executive meeting. By 10 o'clock, Raymond had called an extraordinary board session. By noon, the company had issued an internal communication to senior staff saying that a significant capital restructuring event had occurred and that immediate strategic assessment was underway. Marcus, as vice president of sales, was in all of those rooms. He would have watched Raymond's face from across the table. He would have heard the number. he would have heard the words Lakeview Horizon Partners. He would have watched the room change shape around that name without having the faintest idea that the person behind it was his younger sister. At 2:17 p.m., Marcus called our mother. I know that because our mother called me at 2:45. Her voice was carefully neutral, and that particular neutrality meant only one thing. She was handling information she did not yet know how to arrange. "Have you heard anything about Marcus's company having some kind of problem?" she asked. I asked what kind of problem. She said something about an investor. She paused, then added that Marcus had said a company called Lakeview had pulled out of some very large investment. She told me he sounded scared. I said I was sorry to hear that. There was another pause after that, longer this time. My mother is a perceptive woman. She has always been a perceptive woman. The imbalance between Marcus and me was never caused by a lack of intelligence on her part. It came from some family calculus I never fully decoded. Something involving visibility, need, personality, expectation. Something about the way our household had organized itself around the idea that the loudest person in the room required the most tending. Then she asked me if I knew anything about it. I answered gently. I told her I worked in finance. I said I knew many things about many companies. She went quiet. Then she said my name in that careful tone mothers use when they can feel a truth nearby without yet touching it. I told her I would talk to Marcus when he was ready. I told her to tell him I was here. Then I hung up. After that, I sat at my desk and looked out at Lake Michigan for a long time. A colleague knocked, came in, and spent 40 minutes with me discussing a completely unrelated portfolio company in Denver. And the strange thing, the almost absurd thing, is that I was fully present for all 40 minutes, not because nothing serious was happening, but because the work had always required that kind of compartmentalization from me, and the work really was the most stable thing in my life. It had always been my anchor. Tuesday, Nova Bridge's board formally declared a liquidity crisis. That is a specific technical designation. It triggers contractual obligations. It starts clocks. It opens restructuring frameworks. It is not bankruptcy. It is not collapse. But it is serious enough to ripple outward into markets, legal review, and executive panic. By Tuesday afternoon, a short item had appeared on a financial industry news aggregator. It noted that Nova Bridge Technologies had entered liquidity review following the departure of a major anonymous investor. No names were listed. Lakeview had been structured to protect my identity, but in certain investment circles, the story had already begun to circulate. People who knew how to read silence in capital markets had started reading it. Marcus called me at 6:52 p.m. Tuesday. I let it ring. Not because I was frightened of him. I had not been professionally intimidated by Marcus since I was 26 years old. But I still had not fully decided what I wanted that conversation to be. There is a version of a confrontation like that which is built around victory. A clean reversal. A moment of humiliation returned with interest. I had no desire for that version. Really. None. But there is another version, far rarer and much more difficult, where two people try to see each other accurately for the first time in years. That was the version I wanted. The problem was I did not yet know whether Marcus was capable of participating in it, so I did not answer. Instead, I texted him and told him I would call the next day because I was in the middle of something. He responded immediately. "Serena, please." Then another message followed. He said something really bad was happening at work. I put the phone face down on the table. Wednesday morning, at 7 o'clock, I was on a call with an institutional client in Singapore when my doorman rang the intercom and told me a man was downstairs asking for me. He said the man's name was Marcus Okafor. He said Marcus had called it a family emergency. I finished the client call first. It took 11 minutes. Then I told the doorman to send him up. Marcus looked like he had not slept at all. His shirt was wrinkled, which on Marcus looked almost unnatural. He had always been fastidious about his appearance. Even as a teenager, even in moments that did not matter, he had wanted to look composed. But now there were shadows beneath his eyes that made him look, for the first time I can remember, genuinely older than me in a way that had nothing to do with birth order. I opened the door, stepped aside, and let him in. I did not hug him. He did not try to hug me. He walked into the apartment and stopped. I watched him take it in. The light, the view, the stillness, the quality of a home arranged by someone with taste, discretion, and enough money that every object can serve both purpose and beauty without compromise. The apartment is not ostentatious. I do not like ostentation, but it is unmistakably the home of someone for whom money is no longer a constraint. He looked around and asked, "You live here?" I told him yes. He asked how long. I said for years. He absorbed that slowly. Then he said the name, Lakeview Horizon Partners. I answered yes. He sat down heavily on my couch without being invited. I let that pass. I went to make coffee because I needed something to do with my hands, and when I returned with 2 cups, I sat across from him. Then he said the number out loud. "That's $78 million, Serena, across 4 tranches over 41 months. I told him yes. He stared at me, and what was striking was not only the shock, it was the collapse of an entire private narrative he had apparently been carrying for years. Then he asked the question that mattered most to him in that moment. "Why didn't you tell me?" I had spent the last 72 hours thinking about that question, turning it over from every angle, stripping it of sentiment, testing it against memory, pride, strategy, and pain. There were 6 true answers, maybe more, but I knew which one had to come first. I told him that if he had known, he would have changed. I said he would either have pulled back because he would not have wanted to seem dependent on me, or he would have overclaimed because he would have tried to make my involvement part of his own status. Either way, the dynamic would have been distorted. I said I needed the investment to function cleanly. He said that was a business reason. I told him yes. Then he asked if there was another reason. There was. I looked at him and told him I had wanted to watch him succeed on his own terms. I told him I had wanted to see what he was actually capable of without the weight of knowing I was behind him. And then, because the truth deserved its full shape, I told him there was one more thing. I told him I needed to know that if everything fell apart, I had not been the one who allowed it to happen. After that, he was silent. Outside the windows, a boat cut slowly across Lake Michigan. Then he said the word that linked everything back to the corridor. The wedding, the bourbon, the cracked door. The wedding. I told him yes. I told him I had heard him. To his credit, he looked genuinely ashamed. Not the polished shame of someone already calculating language. Not the public kind. The real kind. The kind that arrives physically, when a person understands that he has not just been mistaken, but mistaken in a way that reveals a much older blindness. He started to apologize. I stopped him. I told him I did not need the apology yet. I told him I needed him to understand something first. I stood up, walked to my home office, and came back with a folder. It was not theater. It was not revenge dressed up as paperwork. Really, it was neither of those things. It was documentation. Caroline had taught me to respect documentation not as a weapon, but as a record. A clean account of what happened, preserved before memory could soften it or pride could rearrange it into something easier to live with. I set the folder on the coffee table between us. I told Marcus it contained a summary of every disbursement Lakeview had made to Novabridge. Dates, amounts, purposes. I told him it also included the company's financial position at the time of each tranche and what the company would have faced without that capital. Then I paused and told him to look at page 6. I said page 6 contained a letter from Raymond Cho to my investment director after Novabridge's Series C closed. In that letter, Raymond had called Lakeview's investment the difference between this company existing and not existing. Marcus did not reach for the folder. He just stared at it. Then I told him there was something else. I said page 14 contained a transcript of the earnings call, where he had told analysts that Novabridge's financial stability was the result of disciplined leadership and a lean operational philosophy. That statement had been made 6 months after our 3rd tranche kept the company from missing payroll. I said it without anger, because it was a fact, and facts, when they matter this much, deserve to be stated plainly. Marcus put his head in his hands. I sat back and waited. Waiting is one of the most useful skills I have ever learned. People reveal things in the silence they never would in an argument. After a while, he looked up. His eyes were red. He told me he had not known. He said he genuinely had not known. I told him I knew that. But not knowing something, I said, is not the same as it not being true. Then he asked me what I wanted from him. That was the real question. Not the money, not the company, not even the apology. What I wanted was harder than all of that. I told him I wanted him to understand what he had been saying about me for the last decade, not so that he would feel bad. Understanding is different from guilt. Guilt can be noisy and self-serving. Understanding is quieter. more permanent. I told him I wanted him to understand that while he had been telling people I never figured out how money works, I had been managing a fund that was keeping his company solvent. I said I needed that truth to land. Really land. Not so that every future conversation between us would be poisoned by shame, because that would help neither of us, but so that he would finally understand the actual shape of what had existed between us all this time. He nodded several times. Then, after a long silence, he asked the question that had been waiting underneath everything else. Was I actually pulling the investment? I had asked myself that question over and over since Saturday night. 40 times, maybe more. I knew the professional answer. I knew the personal answer. What I had spent 2 days trying to determine was whether those were the same answer or two different ones. So I told him the truth. I told him the withdrawal notice was active. I told him the 72-hour window would expire the following evening. He said nothing. Then I told him something else. I said NovaBridge was a good company. The fundamentals were real. Raymond Cho was a capable chief executive officer. The technology worked. None of that had changed because of what happened between Marcus and me. But what had changed, and this was the point that mattered, was that I was no longer willing to be his anonymous backstop. That arrangement was over. Completely over. I told him that if Meridian Capital Group was ever going to continue any relationship with NovaBridge, it would happen on the table. Fully disclosed. Proper governance. His board would know exactly who the investors were. He would know. Everyone would know. There would be no more Lakeview shielding the truth while he stood in front of rooms taking credit for stability he did not understand. He looked at me then with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was not just awe. It was not just grief. It was not just exhaustion. It was something larger and harder to name. Something that seemed to contain all three. The face of a person being rearranged by reality in real time. Then he asked if I would still invest. I told him that depended on many things, and not just on the company. He understood. We sat there in silence for a moment that felt much longer than it really was. Then he looked at me with something close to wonder and said he had not known I was like this. I told him I knew. And then I said that was also something I wanted us to fix. I will not lie and tell you that everything between us was resolved that Wednesday morning. That would make for a cleaner ending. But clean endings are often dishonest ones. What I can tell you is that Marcus stayed for 3 hours. We talked about NovaBridge, yes, but we also talked about things that had nothing to do with the company. We talked about our parents, about the strange geometry of our childhood, about the way a family can love 2 children unequally, without ever deciding consciously to be cruel. Marcus spoke about our father in a way I had never heard before. There was ambivalence in it. Wait, something complicated. I had always assumed our father's attention had felt to Marcus like a gift, something easy, something warm. But really, Marcus described parts of it as pressure, as expectation, as a kind of role he had been assigned before he was old enough to choose it. That surprised me. It also clarified more than I expected. Before he left, he apologized. Not vaguely, not politely. Specifically, he said he was sorry for the wedding, sorry for all of it. He said he knew that apology did not fix anything. I told him it was a start, but it had to be a real start, not a polite one. At the door, he paused, then turned back and asked me one last question. He asked why I had done it at the wedding. Why that night? Why not one of the many times before when he had reduced me, dismissed me, or misread me? I thought about that for a moment. Then I told him because he was happy. I said that even in happiness, even at the beginning of a new life, even while glowing beside someone he loved, he had still chosen to reduce me. And what that told me, but really this was the part that mattered, was that the story he carried about me was not an accident. It was not situational. It was the fixed narrative underneath everything. And unless something interrupted it, that story was going to continue for the rest of our lives. He stood there with that answer for a long moment. Then he left. That afternoon, I called Caroline and told her to hold the withdrawal pending further review. She did not ask why. She simply said, "Whenever you are ready." That evening, I stayed in my office until the sky over Lake Michigan had gone fully dark. I sat there thinking about the $78 million and what it had actually bought. Not NovaBridge's survival. That part was simple. That part was a transaction. Capital in, runway extended, return expected. Clear, rational, legible. No, I was thinking about the other purchase. The 4 years of watching my brother from behind a curtain, the cold comfort of secret power. The way I had told myself anonymity was professionalism, when, in truth, some part of it had also been armor. Armor for the 12-year-old girl who had been given half the money and told not to tell Marcus. Armor for the graduate whose family lunch was rescheduled twice. Armor for the woman who had learned that if she wanted to build anything that lasted, she had better do it quietly, because nobody was coming to hand her the room. There is a cost to building in silence. You get very good at it, then you get better. Then one day, silence stops being a tactic and becomes your preference. Then it becomes your identity. And then, before you fully realize what has happened, you are 34 years old, and the person who should know you best in the world thinks you never figured out how money works. The investment had been real. The company had been sound. The decision to remain anonymous had been professionally defensible. All of that was true. But it was also true that I had used anonymity as protection. And protection, even when justified, extracts its own price. That night, Nadia texted me and asked how it had gone. I stared at the message for a moment and then wrote back one word. Strange. She answered almost immediately. She said that sounded better than I expected and harder than I wanted. I told her that was exactly right. She replied that this is usually what real change looks like. I put my phone down and sat with that sentence for a while. 3 months after the wedding, Meridian Capital Group made a fully disclosed, documented, board-approved investment in Nova Bridge Technologies. The terms were different this time. Tighter governance, full transparency, formal advisory committee representation, quarterly reporting. My name was on the term sheet. Raymond Cho called me personally after the deal closed. He welcomed me as an official partner and said, with genuine warmth, that he had always wanted to meet the person behind Lakeview. I told him the feeling was mutual. Marcus texted me the day the deal closed. He wrote that he was proud of me. Then he added, I mean it this time. I read that message twice. I believed him. But I also knew that one sincere message does not rewrite 10 years of a story. It does not erase old patterns in a single stroke. What it does, if the people involved are serious, is create a different beginning. And sometimes a different beginning is the most honest victory available. 2 weeks later, my father called me. He had seen a brief mention of the deal in a trade publication. Someone had written a short item about Meridian entering the logistics software space. He asked whether I was doing okay with all the finance stuff. I told him I was doing very well. He said Marcus had told him a little about what I did. Then he said I was quite successful. I told him I had worked hard. Then he said something I had waited a very long time to hear from that voice in that order. He said he was proud of me. He said he should say that more. I sat there with the phone in my hand, looking out over the lake, and what struck me was not triumph, not vindication. Those words were somehow smaller than I had imagined they would be. But they were also enough. Not enough to repair the whole past, not enough to make the childhood clean, but enough to let me answer simply, "Thank you, Dad." Then we talked for 11 minutes about almost nothing. The weather in Chicago, the warmth in Atlanta, things that did not matter, and yet, somehow, did. It was one of the better conversations we had shared in years. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and went back to work. Some things resolve. Some things do not resolve so much as become clear. And sometimes the truest ending is simply this: I am still here. I built something real. I am learning, slowly, to let people see it. And the true story, not the one whispered in hotel corridors, not the one told at wedding receptions, not the one built out of habit and family mythology, is still being written. This time, I am the one writing it. If this story stayed with you, leave your thoughts below. Tap like and subscribe for more stories that hit where they should.